I want to make sure we get to as many questions as we can. Jameson asks, as a current high school student, do you have anything to say to local or national youth who may be worried about the political, social, economic world they are entering? And I don't blame them for worrying.
First off, thank you for being here, right? I mean, you deserve a hand for even showing up. Where are you, Jameson?
Where's Jameson? Over there.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And
talk to your friends, Jameson.
Yeah, and I said this earlier, but I truly mean it. You can change the entire trajectory of how issues are discussed by simply showing up to vote repeatedly. It doesn't cost anything. The reason that a lot of the issues that we run on are about things that don't mean anything to you, and here's the self-fulfilling prophecy again, is you don't vote, I don't speak to you, I don't speak to you, you don't vote. You break that cycle, we'll be talking about college debt, which is, right now behind home debt is the second largest debt that people in the United States carry. I mean, think about that for a second, right?
Over $1 trillion.
Over $1 trillion. And by the way, the numbers for personal debt came out today. It's the highest in history. Highest in history. I mean, we were right at that bubble again that we were at before the collapse a decade ago. But again, we're putting a lot of faith in you. We clearly aren't figuring this out, okay? So I think that we do need that engagement, and we need to break away from the cynicism. Where we're not doing you any favors is that we're projecting a sense of cynicism at a local and national level through politics. But I think that if you do show up and you can get your friends to show up, I just see that doing so valuable in changing the trajectory of the issues that we talk about.
I read something very helpful just the other day. It was an article, I think in maybe The Atlantic, that was suggesting that for this generation, the millennial generation, running for office is becoming a trend. And it's kind of like what's doing a Silicon Valley startup was for the previous generation. Sam?
Well, I think, first of all, showing up tonight is a great example of how you can get involved. And I always tell students under age 18 that maybe you can't vote, but you can walk and you can talk. And you might find a colleague. You all complain about schools and what's going on in schools. Well, you find a colleague who is 18 years old, they can run for school board. And you can go out there and get them elected. So you got to participate.
The opportunities are there. Here's another brief campaign war story. One thing that knocked me over was the number of 22-year-olds who were just getting amazing things done. Probably, median age was probably 25 or so. At the staff ball in January 2009, the newly elected president looked out over the crowd. This was this party they threw for the staff. And he looked out over the crowd and said, "Look at you." He says, "You're all 25 years old." And he says, "You know why we won? You didn't know this wasn't possible."
Well, Zach just said something. Zach was an intern in my office. Zach, what was your impression on coming to Washington and coming to the Hill?
Well, as a member of my staff that worked for you would know, I mean, I don't know if you realize that all of Capitol Hill is run by 23, 24, and 25-year-olds. I mean, it is a young place. Sacramento, same thing. It is actually a young person's game on the staff side. That's a fact because of the long hours and everything else, and people still haven't had an opportunity to become jaded on it. But for Jameson, I mean, you can literally be writing international policy in your mid-20s. And that probably explains everything that's happening to us right now. I just thought about. I hadn't really thought this through.
No, now
I'm thinking about thinking.
We found a flaw in the whole system. No, I saw kids organize in one weekend a tour of the state by Barack and Michelle Obama, a concert by Jay-Z, and a concert by Bruce Springsteen in one 4-day weekend, and this was done by people in their early to mid-20s. They'd never done any of that before, but
it's amazing what happens when you empower people.
Yeah.
Give them a shot. Yeah. They'll need it.
Another question, this is from Alan Groves. How do we counter the rising number of Hispanic people being snatched off the street, being reported now? In addition to reporting them, is there a court case that could be made, or is there only nonviolent resistance?
Well, if you're undocumented, you're undocumented, and there is no way of going from undocumented or giving any kind of legitimacy. The question is the priority for enforcement. And what we have been doing is, if you read the statutory law, the responsibility for the Border Patrol, for ICE, the policing force of the Border Patrol, is to deport people who have committed a crime and who are undocumented, committed a crime in the United States. The measurement of that is now by a court issuing a warrant. Now you can issue a warrant just because you didn't show up. You may have had a reason for not showing up in court, and they can take that warrant and go arrest you. But I mean, Barack Obama got criticized for deporting more people than were deported before him. But he was really just enforcing those warrants. Those were people who were undocumented, committed serious crimes, had felony sentences in the United States, and getting out of federal and state prisons who just stayed here. And what we've done is trying to crack down and saying, no, those people, if you're going to have to deport people. Now, what's happening in this kind of going out and doing this sweep now is that they're also rounding up people who have done nothing wrong and would otherwise not be deported at all. Interesting, just anecdotal story, there was a huge battle in Congress 2 years ago when all of these children were showing up on the border, on our southern border, mostly from Central American countries, because the violence in those countries and their relative working in the United States had sent for them, usually sent money down to send the child up, either a relative or their own child. And they get through the process by getting the coyotes and everybody to get them across the border, only in this case, the minute they get to the border, the coyote disappears because they want them to be apprehended because they're children. Why? Because then children will be brought in, interviewed, and tried to be connected with their adult in the United States. And what happens then is that they're scheduled to have a hearing before a hearing officer or judge to determine whether their reason for coming here, this political reason of danger to their lives or their family, and they had to get out, really was warranted. And if there's a finding that they weren't, then they are subject to deportation. But that takes usually about 2 years to get through all that process. And then the ICE is given that warrant saying, go arrest that child. And what the officers tell me, they say, you want us to go out and pull a kid out of a family that's been here for 2 years and is very happy here in the United States just because we have this warrant? So even though there is some heart in some of these officers just saying, we're going to put that warrant at the bottom of the pile. But I think what Trump has done is just been able to create this incredible fear that anybody undocumented is subject to deportation.
And this is, I think, one of those areas where emotion and narrative and just the facts need to come together. Because whatever you feel the solution to immigration challenges is, the facts just show that immigrants of all kinds, including undocumented immigrants from Mexico, commit less crime than native-born Americans do.
It's so hard to draw real conclusions from the numbers in this last election, right? There was an enormous proportion of people who voted for Barack Obama twice who voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. There were a lot of women who voted for Trump. It was like an astonishingly high number of black men who voted for Trump.